My husband's mother demanded I hand over my unborn son to replace the child she claims I stole from her. Then she completely unraveled the moment we revealed the baby was actually a girl. The invitation said, "Celebrating Regina's new son." My name wasn't on it anywhere. I stood in my sister-in-law's living room holding a cup of lukewarm punch, staring at two gift tables set up side by side like a courtroom exhibit. One had a banner that read, "Regina's baby." The other, smaller, tucked near the kitchen doorway, said, "The surrogate." I laughed at first, a short, disbelieving sound, because surely this was a joke. Surely someone had gotten confused with the printer. Then Regina walked to the center of the room in a cream blazer, tapped a spoon against a wine glass, and thanked everyone for supporting her journey back to motherhood. "This baby," she said, hand pressed to her own chest, "not mine, is God's way of giving me back what was taken from me. I want to thank Amara for carrying him. She's been a wonderful vessel." Vessel. She called me a vessel in front of 40 people, including my own mother, who I watched go rigid in her folding chair. Then Regina unveiled a poster board she'd had propped against the fireplace, covered until that exact moment with a bedsheet, a custody timeline, hand-lettered, laminated. Week 1. Baby moves in with grandmother. Month 1. Mother receives supervised visits. Year 1. Baby calls Regina Mama and calls me by my first name. I felt the room tilt. My husband Owen was frozen in the corner, a paper plate of cake in his hand, mouth slightly open, like a man watching a car crash he'd somehow known was coming for months, but had convinced himself wouldn't actually happen. That's when his sister Sienna stood up. "Since you love contracts so much," she said, voice flat and clear, "let me read you something." She held up her phone. She'd been recording for weeks. She read state law on grandparent custody rights out loud to the whole party, and every word of it landed on Regina like a verdict. That was the moment everything cracked open. But to understand how we got a woman standing in her daughter's living room announcing she owned my unborn child, you have to go back. Because Regina didn't become this overnight. She built toward this moment for 2 years, one small violation at a time, and every single one of us let her. I met Owen when I was 26, at a mutual friend's engagement party in Charlotte. He was 30, worked in commercial insurance, had a dry sense of humor, and a habit of remembering small details about people's lives that made you feel important. We dated for 14 months before he proposed at the botanical gardens near his apartment, and I said yes without a single hesitation, because I loved him and because I thought I understood what I was signing up for. I did not understand what I was signing up for. Owen's mother, Regina, was 58 when we married. She'd raised Owen mostly alone after his father, Walter, left when Owen was 9 and came back into the picture only years later, remarried to a woman named Diane, living 40 minutes away. Regina had built her entire identity around being Owen's mother, not a mother, the mother. She talked about him in the present tense, the way other people talk about a career they gave everything to. 3 months into our marriage, at a 4th of July barbecue at Owen's aunt's house, Regina pulled me aside near the drink cooler. She had a paper plate of potato salad in one hand, and she looked at me with an expression I'd later learn to recognize as her opening move, sweet, almost apologetic, right before something untakebackable came out of her mouth. "When you have a son," she said, "he's mine to raise. You took my boy from me. You owe me another one." I laughed, because I thought it was a joke, the kind of thing mothers-in-law say in movies. She didn't laugh. "I've already talked to a lawyer about grandparent rights," she said, and took a bite of potato salad like she'd just told me what time dinner was. I told Owen that night in the car. He rubbed his face and said, "She's dramatic. She doesn't mean it like that." I wanted to believe him. I was 27 years old and desperately wanted my new mother-in-law to like me, so I filed it away as a strange comment instead of what it actually was, a mission statement. Over the next year and a half, the comments never stopped. Every family gathering, she'd bring up her future grandson, not our child, hers. She told me at a Christmas dinner that she'd already picked out nursery colors, sage green and cream, very gender neutral, she said, but obviously for a boy. She bought infant boy clothes on clearance at Target and stored them in a spare bedroom at her house that she'd started calling his room. Owen saw it once when he went to fix her garbage disposal and told me about it with a strange laugh, like it was funny instead of terrifying. She introduced me to her friends at church as the woman who stole her son, but will make it right eventually. I heard her say it with my own ears at a retirement party for one of her coworkers. The woman she said it to gave me a pitying look, like I was a hostage. Owen did tell her to stop, multiple times. I want to be fair to him. He wasn't a man who ignored the problem completely, but every time he pushed back, Regina cried. She'd say he'd turned against her, that his new wife had poisoned him, that she had nothing left in the world except him, and now she was losing that too. And every single time, Owen backed down within the same conversation. I watched him do it so many times I started keeping a mental count. There was a specific incident, about 8 months before I got pregnant, that I didn't understand the weight of until much later. Regina signed me up for fertility newsletters. Not baby newsletters. Fertility ones. The kind meant for women actively trying to conceive who wanted tracking tips. I never gave her my email address for that. When I asked how she got it, she said Owen must have given it to her, for planning purposes. Owen swore he never did. I believed him, but I never got an answer for how she actually got it, and I let it go, because confronting Regina always cost more energy than it seemed worth in the moment. At a birthday dinner for Owen's father, awkward on its own, since Regina and Walter had been divorced for over a decade and still couldn't be in a room together without tension, Regina asked me loudly, in front of 12 people, whether my period was late that month. I was not pregnant. I hadn't told anyone we were even trying. She'd been asking variations of that question at nearly every gathering for months, always publicly, always timed to catch me off guard. I realized later she was tracking me the way you'd track livestock. The clearest warning sign, the one I think about most now, happened at Thanksgiving the year before I got pregnant. Regina arrived with a manila folder. She waited until we were all seated, turkey carved, plates full, and then she slid a piece of paper across the table to me. It was a printed contract, formatted like a real legal document, with a signature line at the bottom. It stated that when I gave birth to a son, I agreed to allow Regina primary custody by his 5th birthday, with visitation rights reserved for me and Owen. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before I understood what I was looking at. The table went quiet. Owen's cousin actually put his fork down. "I'm not signing this," I said. Regina's face crumpled instantly, tears on command, the kind of crying that starts and stops like a faucet. "You're destroying my life a second time," she said. "First you took my son, now you won't even let me have a piece of him back." Nobody at that table defended me except my own mother, who told Regina flatly that what she'd just done was not normal. Regina spent the rest of dinner sniffling into a napkin while Owen apologized to her, not to me, for upsetting her. That was the pattern. Every escalation ended with Owen managing her feelings and me absorbing the cost. When I actually got pregnant in March, I told Owen first, obviously, and we agreed to wait 12 weeks before telling family. Regina found out at week 9 because Owen let it slip during a phone call, thinking she'd be excited and normal about it. She showed up at our house that same night, 10 p.m., unannounced, arms literally full of blue baby clothes she must have kept in her car for exactly this moment. "I knew it," she said, standing on our porch in a bathrobe under her coat. "I knew this day would come." I told her gently that we didn't know the sex yet, that it was too early even to consider finding out. She looked at me like I'd said something offensive. "I've prayed for a boy every night for 2 years," she said. "God wouldn't betray me like that, not after everything I've lost. I want to be honest about something here, because I think it matters for understanding what came later." At this point, I still tried to give Regina the benefit of the doubt. I told myself grief does strange things to people, that maybe losing years with her son to a divorce and then handing him off to marriage had genuinely broken something in her that she couldn't help. I wasn't looking for a villain. I was looking for an explanation that let me keep loving my husband's mother the way you're supposed to. That sympathy didn't survive what came next. The escalation, once it started in earnest, moved fast, and every time I thought we'd hit the ceiling of what Regina was capable of, she broke through it within weeks. The first crack came during my 2nd trimester. I had a routine OB appointment in June. Nothing unusual, just blood work and a check-in. When I arrived, the receptionist looked at me strangely and asked if I was there with Regina's group. I had no idea what she meant. It turned out Regina had called the office earlier that week, introduced herself as my mother-in-law, and told the front desk she was the primary guardian coordinating care for the pregnancy, since I was, in her words, young and inexperienced. She'd asked to be added as an emergency contact and to receive copies of my test results. The office thankfully hadn't complied, but they flagged my file and asked if there was a safety concern. I said I wasn't sure yet. I was still trying to be diplomatic about my own mother-in-law's behavior, which in hindsight was its own kind of denial. I responded reasonably. I called Regina and asked her calmly to never contact my medical providers again. She told me I was being paranoid and that she only wanted to be involved, that most mothers-in-law would kill for a daughter-in-law who let them help. I held my ground. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 appointments later, in August, Regina showed up in the waiting room. Not invited, not mentioned. She sat there when I arrived, told the receptionist again that she was the primary guardian, and that I was just the surrogate, using that exact phrase for the first time that I'm aware of. Security had to be called to walk her out. I sat in an exam room afterward shaking, while my doctor asked, not unkindly, whether I felt safe at home. Quick pause from the story. If you enjoy these stories, consider taking a listen to our Spotify show, linked in the description for early access to new stories in better audio quality. Now back to the video. I told Owen about the security incident that night, and for the first time, I saw something shift in his face. Not disbelief, recognition. He'd been managing his mother's behavior his whole life by minimizing it, and even he couldn't minimize security guards escorting her out of a medical building. He called her. I heard him yelling for the first time in our marriage, telling her she'd crossed a line that could get her legally barred from seeing the baby entirely. Regina cried, said he was choosing that woman over his own mother, said she had nothing left, the same script she'd run 100 times before. But this time, Owen didn't fully back down. He told her she needed to stop or she'd force us to cut her off completely. It was progress. It was also, I'd learn, not nearly enough. 3 weeks later, a friend of mine sent me a screenshot from a private Facebook group for expecting mothers. Someone named Regina W. had joined the group, posting that she was pregnant with her miracle baby after years of heartbreak, asking other members how to establish legal custody rights the moment the baby was born, framing herself as the actual expectant mother. She'd used a stock photo of a pregnant belly as her profile picture. She was 59 years old. I confronted her directly this time, over the phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to sit down. I asked her why she was pretending to be pregnant online. "I feel like I am," she said, no shame in her voice at all. "This baby is as much mine as it is yours. More, honestly, since I'll actually know how to raise him right." I hung up. I remember standing in my kitchen afterward, hand pressed against the counter thinking, this woman genuinely believes what she's saying. That was somehow more frightening than if she'd been lying. Around this same time, a small detail entered the picture that I didn't understand the significance of until much later. Owen's father, Walter, called Owen out of nowhere and asked, almost carefully, whether Regina had said anything to us about the ultrasound from her doctor. Owen said no. He had no idea what his dad was talking about. Walter said never mind, it was probably nothing, and changed the subject. I noted it, filed it away the way I'd learned to file away every strange Regina-adjacent detail, and moved on because there was too much else happening to chase down a stray comment. The escalation kept climbing. In September, at 32 weeks pregnant, I got a call from a woman who identified herself as a case coordinator from a local family law office. She said she was following up on paperwork submitted by a Regina Whitfield regarding grandparent visitation rights and custody preparation, and wanted to confirm my contact information for future correspondence. I told her, as steadily as I could manage, that I had never authorized any such filing and to remove my information immediately. The woman apologized, said the paperwork listed me as a cooperating party, and that she'd flag it for review. That night, I finally understood that this wasn't going to burn out on its own. Regina wasn't going to have a moment of clarity. She was going to keep pushing every boundary until something physically stopped her. Owen and I decided to plan the baby shower carefully, inviting only people we trusted, keeping the guest list controlled, thinking that would insulate us from another incident. We told Regina the date. We did not tell her the venue was Sienna's house specifically because Sienna had offered, unprompted, to help keep an eye on things. We had no idea Regina had been planning her own event inside our event. The morning of the shower, in early October, I remember feeling almost normal for the first time in months. I was 36 weeks along, tired but hopeful, wearing a soft yellow dress my mother had bought me. I walked into Sienna's living room, and the first thing I saw was the 2 gift tables. Everything from that point forward, the banner reading Celebrating Regina's New Son, the sign labeling my table The Surrogate, the poster board with the custody timeline laminated like a museum exhibit, happened almost too fast to process in real time. I remember the specific horror of watching my own mother's face go pale across the room, of feeling every set of eyes shift toward me like I was the one who needed to explain something. But the piece that changed everything, the piece that recontextualized the entire 2 years leading up to that afternoon, came from Sienna. Sienna had been suspicious of Regina for months, ever since the fake custody contract at Thanksgiving the year before. She told me afterward that she started documenting things quietly because she suspected nobody would believe the full scope of it without proof. She'd recorded 3 separate conversations with Regina over the preceding weeks, including one where Regina explicitly said, on record, that she intended to take the baby home from the hospital if the parents weren't being reasonable. At the shower, once the poster board came out, Sienna stood up in front of everyone and said, "Since you love contracts so much, let me read you something." She pulled up her phone and read our state's actual grandparent rights statute aloud. Grandparents have no automatic legal claim to custody. They cannot remove a child from fit, married parents under any ordinary circumstance. She kept scrolling and read from an actual court case, a real ruling, one she'd found while researching after Thanksgiving, where a judge described a grandmother's behavior, nearly identical to Regina's, as dangerous and delusional, and cited it as evidence that the grandmother was unfit to have unsupervised contact with the child at all. The room went dead silent. I watched Regina's face drain from a flushed pink to a sickly gray-white in real time. Guests who had been holding cups of punch set them down. Several people quietly pulled out their phones and started recording, which felt surreal, like watching your worst moment become someone else's content. Sienna looked directly at Regina. "Everyone in this room just watched you commit behavior that could constitute criminal harassment and potentially kidnapping conspiracy. I have it documented. All of it." That was the moment the truth of the last 2 years landed on the whole family at once, not just on me. It wasn't a secret anymore. It wasn't Owen managing his mother's feelings in private phone calls while I absorbed the damage alone. It was public, undeniable, witnessed. Owen finally stood up from the corner where he'd been frozen since the poster board first came out. I watched him cross the room, and his voice shook, but he didn't stop. "This ends right now," he said. "You need to leave." Regina reached for him the way she must have when he was small, arms out, expecting comfort, expecting the years of managing her feelings to kick in automatically the way it always had. He stepped back from her. I saw something break across her face that I still think about sometimes. A genuine confusion, like she truly could not process her son refusing her. She started screaming, not crying anymore, screaming that we were all conspiring against her, that God had personally promised her this child to make up for everything she'd lost when Walter left. She said it loud enough that the neighbors could probably hear through Sienna's open windows. Sienna, without raising her voice at all, picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency police line right there in the living room. The second Regina heard the word police come out of her mouth, she screamed louder, threatening to sue everyone in the room, threatening to sue Sienna specifically for defamation, threatening legal action against a group of 40 terrified party guests who were already gathering their coats and edging toward the door. Owen's father, Walter, arrived before the officers did. I don't know who called him, maybe Owen, maybe Sienna, but he walked in, took one look at the poster board still clutched against Regina's chest, and told her flatly that she'd lost her mind. "If you leave quietly right now," he said, "I'll drive you home myself and nobody presses charges tonight." tonight, that offer expires the second those officers walk through that door. She argued with him, told him the baby was legally hers, that he'd never understood her, that he'd abandoned her the same way everyone eventually abandoned her. Walter raised his voice, the only time I ever heard him do it, and told her the only right she had left in this situation was the right to leave before she ended up in handcuffs in front of her son's family. Something in his tone finally landed. I watched her shoulders drop. She gathered up her blue baby clothes, still folded in a tote bag by the door, and the poster board, and as Walter guided her toward the exit, she turned back and looked at me with an expression of pure venom, unfiltered, the mask completely gone. Then she looked at Owen. "You used to love me before she ruined everything," she said. He didn't answer her. He walked her to the door in silence and closed it behind her without a word, and the second it clicked shut, I broke down completely. Months of fear, all of it, crashed over me at once, in front of everyone, and my mother crossed the room and just held me while I shook. The days after the shower were chaos in a slower, more bureaucratic way. Owen filed for an emergency restraining order the following Monday, using Sienna's recordings and the medical office incident and the fake law office paperwork as supporting evidence. The judge granted a temporary order within 4 days, which surprised the family law attorney we consulted, who told us the documentation Sienna had gathered was unusually thorough for a first filing. Regina was barred from contacting either of us, from appearing at our home, workplace, or medical providers, and specifically from any hospital where I might deliver. Family lines drew themselves almost instantly. Owen's aunt, the same one who'd hosted the barbecue where this all started 2 years earlier, sided immediately with Regina, calling Owen to say we were being cruel to a grieving mother. She stopped speaking to Owen entirely when he refused to apologize. Regina's sister, on the other hand, called me directly, something she'd never done before, and told me she'd watched Regina do smaller versions of this same pattern with 2 other relationships over the decades. A controlling obsession with a niece's wedding, a similar fixation on a coworker's child years earlier that had ended in a workplace complaint. Nobody had ever pushed back hard enough to stop it, she said. She thought maybe now, finally, someone would. Walter became, unexpectedly, one of our steadiest allies. He and Owen had a complicated relationship for most of Owen's life, shaped by the divorce and years of distance. But Walter showed up for every logistical thing that came after the shower, driving Owen to the courthouse, sitting with us during the restraining order hearing, calling every few days just to check in without asking anything of us in return. It was the first time in years, Owen told me quietly one night, that his father had acted like a parent instead of a guest in his own son's life. Regina, for her part, did not go quietly into any kind of reflection. She made increasingly desperate moves in the weeks after the restraining order. She tried to have a mutual friend deliver a handwritten letter to our house, which violated the order and got logged with our attorney. She created a new social media account under a slightly altered name and attempted to friend request my cousins, presumably to keep tabs on the pregnancy through a side door. She called Owen's workplace and left a message with HR claiming she was concerned for her son's mental state and that his wife was isolating him from his family, which resulted in an uncomfortable, unnecessary conversation between Owen and his manager. Each move made the legal picture against her worse. Our attorney said, almost sympathetically, that Regina was building the case against herself faster than we could have built it ourselves. There was a specific afternoon, about 3 weeks after the shower, when I sat alone in the nursery. We'd started painting sage green, the exact color Regina had once described as her plan for a boy's room, and I cried for a very different reason than the fear that had driven most of my tears that year. I cried because somewhere in the wreckage of everything Regina had done, there had also been once a version of her that could have been a real grandmother to this baby, a woman who baked, who I'd seen genuinely light up at Owen's childhood photos, who clearly loved her son so completely that the love itself had curdled into something possessive and monstrous. I grieved that version of her. I think I'll keep grieving her for a long time, even though the woman she actually became made that grief impossible to indulge for long. Legal complications kept threading through those weeks too, texture I hadn't expected. The restraining order needed a follow-up hearing to convert from temporary to permanent, scheduled for 2 weeks after my due date, which meant navigating late pregnancy and a courtroom appearance simultaneously. Our attorney advised documenting every single contact attempt Regina made, however small, which turned grocery runs and mail pickups into small exercises in vigilance I resented having to perform at 8 months pregnant. Owen's employer required a formal statement clarifying the HR complaint had no basis, a bureaucratic hoop that took 2 more weeks and 3 separate meetings to close out. Then, 5 weeks after the shower, I went into labor 3 days before my due date. We decided, in the calm after the restraining order and before the birth, that we wanted one small, quiet gender reveal, just the people who had actually shown up for us. No Regina, no poster boards, no audience beyond people we trusted completely. We held it in Sienna's backyard on a cool October afternoon, just 12 of us, Walter included, my parents, Owen's cousin who'd put his fork down at that long-ago Thanksgiving, Sienna standing closest to us with her hand on my shoulder the whole time. We cut into the cake together, Owen's hand over mine on the knife, and the inside was bright, unmistakable pink, a girl. Everyone cheered, actual joyful noise, the first celebration in 2 years that hadn't been shadowed by dread. My mother cried happy tears for the first time in this entire saga. Owen kissed the side of my head and whispered that he didn't care what we were having. He just wanted this specific moment, this uncomplicated moment, and I understood exactly what he meant. And that's when Walter pulled Owen aside, a strange, unreadable look crossing his face, and asked one quiet question that made my stomach drop instantly. Did Regina ever show you the sonogram photo from her own doctor's visit last spring? Owen said no, same as before, and asked what his father meant. Walter hesitated, then admitted that Regina had gone to a fertility specialist 8 months earlier, at 59 years old, asking about surrogacy options and embryo adoption, telling the doctor she needed a son of her own, since her daughter-in-law was unreliable. Walter had found out by accident, an insurance statement mailed to an address he still shared with her from before their divorce was fully settled. He hadn't known what to do with that information and had sat on it for months, hoping it wouldn't matter. It explained everything and nothing at once. It explained the ultrasound comment from months earlier that he'd brushed off. It explained a depth of delusion I hadn't fully grasped even after everything else. Regina hadn't just wanted our son. She'd been actively pursuing a backup plan to manufacture one of her own if we didn't comply, a detail so unhinged that even Walter, after everything, looked shaken saying it out loud. We never confirmed how far that pursuit had gone. Our attorney said it wasn't relevant to our case and advised us to let it go, that chasing every thread of Regina's behavior would consume years we could spend actually raising our daughter instead. He was right, and eventually, I made myself agree. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday in late October. We named her Josephine, after my grandmother. No trace of Regina's chosen names anywhere near her birth certificate. Regina was not informed until 3 days after the birth, through our attorney, as required by the terms of the restraining order's information clause. I don't know what she felt when she got that letter. I've stopped wondering. The permanent restraining order was granted 2 months later, extended to cover our daughter explicitly, with a judge's note in the record describing Regina's documented conduct as consistent with a pattern of escalating psychological entitlement toward a minor, language our attorney said would matter enormously if Regina ever tried to challenge it in the future. So far, she hasn't. It's been 14 months now. Josephine is walking, saying a handful of words, mostly no and dog, and completely unaware of the storm that surrounded the first months of her existence. Walter sees her every other weekend and has become, against every odd I would have predicted 2 years ago, one of the most present grandparents in her life. Sienna is her godmother. My own mother flew in for a month after the birth and still calls every single day. Regina has made no contact since the permanent order was finalized. I heard, secondhand, through Owen's aunt before she stopped speaking to us entirely, that Regina tells people a different version of this story now, one where she was persecuted by a jealous daughter-in-law and a son who chose his wife over his own mother. I understand why she needs that version. The real one is unbearable to sit inside. I think about that gift table sometimes. The surrogate. 2 words meant to erase me completely from my own daughter's beginning. I think about how close we came to letting that erasure happen slowly, gathering by gathering, silence by silence, because confronting it always felt like more trouble than it was worth in the moment. I think about how long it took a room full of people finally seeing the truth all at once, instead of in the small manageable doses Regina had been feeding us for 2 years. The truth about people like Regina is that they rarely announce themselves as villains. They arrive as grieving mothers, devoted grandmothers, women who just want to be involved. The warning signs look small enough to excuse, one at a time, right up until the day they don't. My mistake wasn't naivety. It was believing that patience would eventually be rewarded with change. Some people don't change because change was never the plan. Possession was. I sleep well most nights now. I still feel a small, complicated grief when I see other grandmothers doting normally on their grandchildren at the park, the version of family I thought I was marrying into. That loss is real, and I've stopped pretending it isn't. But Josephine has a good life, full of people who show up for her honestly, without conditions and without laminated timelines. That's the son Regina claimed I stole. That's the daughter she never got to touch.